Right, okay. How small are the components? Ah, well, they would be discrete, wouldn't they? I would suggest that they actually go on a fractal level down to the infinitesimally small and the extraordinarily large. That there is no the smallest point in the universe and there is no largest point in the universe, and NASA's own work at measuring the edge of the universe has held up that the universe is essentially holographic in nature. That's not to say that it's illusory, but that in every part of the universe the information is carried to make a whole universe. We could even go into hyperdimensional pinch points, but right. Oh, let's have some soul sacrifice. That's a bloody good idea. I always like a bit of soul sacrifice. Here's a bit of Carlos. Right, okay, let's just have a scroll back up through this chat. Right, okay, Paddy, let's go back to basics then. Alright, so if you grasp the... Charlie. If you grasp this interfering energy pattern, if you imagine them like waves on a pond and you drop two stones into the pond, where the ripples of the two circular rings coming out from the two stones interact, you end up with something called an interference pattern. Now what happens is when the peak of a wave meets the peak of a wave coming from the other stone, you end up with an amplified peak, which is twice as high as the two baseline peaks. And the same way when you have two troughs of a wave colliding, then you have a double dip trough. Now these form perfectly symmetrical grid patterns on the surface of the water. Now what I'm suggesting is that when these patterns, if you were to think of them as three-dimensional patterns emitting in all directions rather than just along the flat surface of water, then basically what you have is the shapes emerging that we see as matter. So what we perceive as matter is simply an interference grid of interacting electromagnetic toroidal energy waves, and that through the fractal nature of the universe expanding, possibly, I mean, saying that it's expanding is a wrong thinking about it, because it can't expand because it has nothing to expand into. So what we have is a rolling universe, a toroidal universe, where time and matter is constantly recycled and would appear to the observer as constantly travelling outwards, but that's because we can't observe the hyperdimensions where it's then returning back. So essentially we have these interacting interference patterns, and where we see the high peaks and the high troughs, the amplified interference patterns, which would then rise. If you were looking across the surface of the water, you would see these as grand peaks. These would be twice as high as the ripples that surround them. So you would have a little point of excess energy, yeah, or in the negative of negative energy, just in that spot. If the two stones, rather than being dropped into the water, are vibrated up and down in the water at a regular rate, then these can become standing waves, where essentially the wave is constantly supported by the movement of energy in towards the centre, and again either produces a peak or a trough, but in essence an area of raised or lowered energetic state. If you again extrapolate this out into the three-dimensional consideration that you have to place upon this, then those points would essentially be little nuggets of energy, little high spots energetically in the three-dimensional space. So if you imagine a cube, say, like a dice, like the shape of a dice, and if you were to shake the outside of the cube, the energy that you imparted into the cube from all directions would meet at points by the generation of these standing waves in the air, or whatever you want to consider the fluid within the cube, and these would become essentially concentrated points of energy, and this is what we know as the subatomic particles. So protons will be little high points on the waveform, and neutrons will be little low points on the waveform, and that all of these points of energy are in a constant dance around each other because of the nature that the density of space-time creates with attraction and repulsion. That anything that's in an attractive relationship or a repulsive relationship tends to impart spin. Again, all of the scientists, when you start asking about toroidal space, they all kind of shrug their shoulders. They know that everything spins, and it spins pretty much forever, but nobody can quite explain why. And this, again, this would be explained by this toroidal universe where the multiverse that the multi-dimensional universe that we exist in is mirrored by a hyperdimensional universe working in reverse, unseen, because we can't see beyond that realm of dimension. So again, I mean, and this is known. There are, for anybody that doesn't know, there's anti-atoms and anti-particles. When they're doing fusion reactions, they actually rely on the creation of antiparticles, and it's the collision of these two, the fusion, the joining together of a particle and an antiparticle, that we take the energy from. And fusion reactors are working. They're the opposite of fission reactors. They're not atomic reactors where you bring two atomic sources together and create heat. These literally reunite the fundamental particles of the universe in a collision that creates an enormous output of heat for almost no input of stuff. You basically disassemble the stuff that you drop in there and turn it into raw energy. Fascinating science. I doubt very much if they'll ever get it to work particularly stably. I think the nature of the universe is just too chaotic to allow for a stable fusion reaction to provide power, but that's my own belief system. I try not to put that on. Thank you, Paddy. I'm glad that you think this stuff's incredible. I've thought this stuff has been incredible since I read Einstein at the age of 11, and have just been completely blown away by it ever since. I had great fun over New Year's Eve. I have a friend who's was at least a real rational fundamentalist scientist that studied astronomy since age 12, but hadn't quite... I told me it. Gnosis, mate. Logic. Apply logic. Read the stories. They're just stories. Read the stories and read them as stories rather than as fact. And this all comes to you. Nassim Haramein is certainly the one who gave me the star tetrahedron bit. If anybody wants to really have their brains blown, go for Nassim Haramein. I think that may actually be called Event Horizon. But anyway, yeah, he's got a huge library of online stuff that just is incredible. Thank you, Paddy. No, there are no complete morons, mate. I came through a fucking hideously overpacked modern comprehensive school in the middle of Essex where we were designed basically to be factory fodder or cannon fodder. So, you know what I mean, work at Ford's or go and get shot at was the option when it came to work careers day at my school. I came out of it with no education from school whatsoever, but I damn well educated myself. I wasn't taking that for a dose of life. So, yeah, no, just keep learning, people. You know, it's never too late to learn. It's never too late to consider what you previously thought was inconceivable, and it's never too late either to reconsider deeply held beliefs. This is where I was just going with the Westy story, that essentially I broke this to Westy in probably what was a 4 or a 6 hour conversation when we were both completely out of our heads on New Year's Eve. And yeah, he left the party that day fundamentally convinced that his belief in black holes and the Big Bang that he had held since a very early age was as bunk as what I said, and went away with an entire new grasp of the possibilities of physics that instead of detracting from the beauty and the majesty of the universe, in fact only increase it. this stuff doesn't do anything to remove any of the fascination of, like people were pointing out, the spirals that are in a sunflower seed, or the chaotic shape of a broccoli head, or, you know what I mean? These are all essentially complexities of a fractal geometrical universe. And I suppose that's where I need to go. So essentially, Paddy, are you happy that the structure of atoms is essentially no more or less than the three-dimensional splash pattern of energies being dropped into a sea of star tetrahedron-shaped coil springs of a vast three-dimensional bed? This is the thing, you see, there is no expansion in the universe. The universe has nothing to expand into. It is. It just is. There is no outside. Uni means all. Yeah. So there is no outside. This is it. There may be more of this than we know at the moment, but it's more than likely going to be hyperdimensional. So the outside is going to be of a different order to that of the inside. But anyway, that's kind of going off topic. Essentially, the universe is seen as expanding, not because it's expanding, but it's reducing in energy and increasing in complexity. There is the idea of entropy is that things go from hot to cold and not the other way. That energy goes from usable to obsolete. Well, my suggestion is that with this toroidal universe, that would actually be bunk, and the energy simply goes from positively polarised to negatively polarised, and it exchanges field energy, torsion energy in the conversion, and that's probably what drives most of these magnet motors and supposed over unity engines that we're seeing in the free energy field. I doubted all of those a few years ago, but I've been looking very carefully into some of those, and it would appear that many of them are harnessing some kind of torsion field, and they're not using energy from anything else. I have my concerns about the amount of energy that's going to go to produce that many neodymium magnets, that they're going to be any sort of real saviour for the planet, but it certainly makes some very interesting science. As to the planets separating, anybody seen the shrinking Earth theory, or the expanding Earth theory? Again, I would have issues with the consideration of time-space in that, but certainly it's a very clever bit of kind of logical extrapolation. Some chap has basically done away with subduction in tectonic plates and then run the clock back, removing all of the expansion activity. So, like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, where that produces new material each year, if you wind that back like re-zipping the zipper, basically all the continents all slowly slot into place, leaving the planet about half the size that it is currently. And if you do the same to Mars, along the huge rift valley that you can see like a huge scar on Mars, using the NASA surface data, the terrain data, and just simply remove each layer of terrain data one at a time from the picture, you again see this huge, makes the Grand Canyon look like a mere scratch, huge geological feature basically re-zip itself, and this would suggest that the planets are quite literally growing. Again, you see, it's entirely possible that the action of time-space is so complex that it's almost impossible to really factor in. All right, now I'm going to have to go. Let me go for another bloody tune here, because if I'm going to go into the warping of time-space and how brain-twisting it is to even start thinking about these subjects, I'm going to have to draw a moment.